Or how about this one, which is equally as awkward and terrible? When you go home as a searcher and your family asks you what you're doing professionally now.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I'm just cruising the Craigslist of businesses all day. Pretty early on in our relationship, she articulated like, hey, like if you come to me with something about the business, like I need to know if you're looking for me to give you ideas, if you're looking to vent, if you're looking like what are we actually doing here?
That's such a good point. Like I almost want you to say that again. Like the fact that all of us are internalizing a bunch of stress. And so like when we go home and we want to talk about it, what are we actually looking for the spouse to do? Because the spouse is probably it's not so clear to them, right? A lot of us get into ownership of small companies to truly have that time independence. And so I think it's true. And it's almost universally true with owners I talk to. They don't ever have to say no because of work. There's generally never time when you just can't go to a kid's drop-off, a performance, a celebration, you name it, a sporting event. So it's super valuable to have that flexibility. You just got to figure out the way it works for you.
All right. Welcome to The Intentional Owner, episode 5, potentially. I don't really know. The cadence
maybe 4.
Maybe 4, maybe 6. We'll find out at the same time as you. But today we're going to talk a little bit about how SMB ownership impacts your spouse and children and kind of just the whole life impact beyond, your own personal, professional career. And this feels like a topic that I've been excited to talk about with you in particular, given you've really done it and gone through life phases. But before we jump in, how's your week? How are things going?
Oh, it's great. It's Tuesday, feels like Thursday afternoon. The only thing I've done well this entire week is exercise twice. Everything else has been a bit of a fire drill, but good.
It's 2 times more than me, and it's it's still Tuesday.
To the idea of being intentional, it was one of the things that it fell to the wayside last year when we were recapping our fence business. So time to get back.
Do you work out every day now?
Wow, that's really generous. I am consistently walking into my garage between 5 and 6 a.m. to do something.
Wow.
4 days a week.
That's good. Yeah, I want to get a Peloton again. I had a Peloton during COVID because that was at the firm I was at. They just got us all Pelotons.
Yeah,
which was nice.
Yeah. Well, you were in New York during COVID, right?
Yeah, but at that time I was at my ex's parents' place in Burlington, Vermont. That's where we kind of escaped New York. And life in Vermont hadn't really changed. It's you didn't really see people anyways.
Yeah.
And so
Beautiful.
Anyways, I'm trying to remember. I can't believe it's only Tuesday. That also feels kind of surreal to me. We're in the we're the business is clipping along, whatever you say. But yeah, it's when we're in our winter season and we're sort of preparing for it to get to spring and summer again, it's that kind of uneasy, everything is fine, but should we be doing stuff to prepare for the upcoming season to really be ready to go? That's the part that I think even when it's quiet, there's a little bit of you, there's that voice in the back of your head being all right, you should be grinding a little harder then.
Totally. Problem is not many businesses that I see are seasonal, but I guess it's more common geographically. Right. And it's so hard to shift your mentality from, okay, it's slow season, it's okay to not be working 12 hours a day. Right. Because you know that summer's coming and you're going to work 12 hours a day, every day.
Yep. The one thing that has to happen this week is we need to get our freaking 2024 books closed. That has been, the tax deadline is in 4 days, so that's got to happen.
Extension.
Yeah, I know, but I would it's done. It's just not done. You know what I mean?
So here's one of the realities of being an SMB owner. I was explaining to one of the guys here that the tax deadlines are so intense in the spring. You've got 1099 and W-2 deadline Jan 31, which is, W-2 is generally fine, but the 1099, scraping your bank, transaction history to figure out who you owe. And it's just at the wrong time. You're trying to get a strong start to the year, and then your CPA hits you over the head with that that task that is absolutely no value add. So like enjoy that wherever you want to plug it in. And then, just as you've forgotten about the 1099 pain, you realize your entity level tax return is due on March 15. So like you're trying desperately to actually do that. Then you get to today and decide to extend and then just realize you're never going to file your personal return on time again in your life as you are an SMB owner.
Luckily for me, that part I was used to because I got K1s at my private equity firms, and those K1s don't arrive until July. And so I've had to file an extension for personal taxes for the last 4 years. So that's just is what it is. The kicker on that obviously is you have to pay the estimate, and if you were wrong, that you still get charged a penalty.
Yes.
Which is just one of the oddest. Whatever.
I had that pleasure this year. Oh, I should say this year. The reason I'm venting frustration is guess who just filed their 2023 taxes?
Oh, you made it into 2025.
Yes, I did.
Your personal?
Yes, a couple of the, particularly one of the entities that is a recipient of a lot of K1s.
Mm-hmm.
So it is ultimately the laggard, and then that feeds up to the personal. But I'm not as terrible as I sound. In Florida, we got a big, I don't know what you would call it, auto extension due to the hurricanes in September. So
fair.
I am not the worst.
Okay, I guess that's fair. The other thing with the 1099s is now there's the flurry of W9s also,
yes.
Which is it's just companies trading paperwork for no reason, kind of. That drives me nuts. I just go to the PO box, I get 15 new W9s, and I put them right in the recycling. There's nothing. It just, I don't know what to make of it.
But
whatever.
We digress. Being an SMB owner is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's dive in. So the topic today: how does SMB ownership impact your spouse and children? So, Sam, you want to give us, as the only one of us that actually has a spouse or children, you want to give us a quick timeline again, when you got married, when you had kids, relative to your career in small business?
Yeah, but to be clear, we're going to do this two ways. So we're going to speak about your spouse, even though you guys aren't married. And, because I think it's equally important. This is a partnership, no matter what.
Totally. By the way, on the first episode, I think you said something. We were talking about Anna and you said our spouses, and I didn't correct you. And that was the one thing my brother texted me after he listened to it. He was like, "So I see you're not correcting Sam on the fact that you and Anna aren't actually married." I was like, "Let it go, man. It's chill."
What do you call it? You call it partner, or you have a word for it?
Yeah,
partner,
just partners. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. All right. So timeline is pretty easy. I got out of law school in 2014. Moved from Charlottesville, Virginia to back home to Tampa, Florida. And the story is funny, so I'll tell it. Got married the week after I graduated from law school, and 2 weeks after my wife got graduated from dental school. So we both moved home and got married right after graduation. I ripped right into studying for the bar exam after a honeymoon. So all of my classmates were 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks ahead in bar review prep. I was quite literally pulling out my eyebrows. I was so anxious about having to pass the bar exam with 40% less prep than my classmates, but it worked out.
It feels like you could have scheduled the honeymoon after the bar. That feels like it would have been more fun.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, it worked out.
Yeah.
I was hyper efficient with
right.
my passing score. Let's put it that way.
Did you pass on the first try?
Barely.
Nice.
But yes.
Yes, great. That means you studied the right amount.
Exactly. Hence the efficient. So this was 2014. I think it's important to share that my wife then went off to residency. So just to give you a sense for the flow of life and what we were both doing, I went and joined a fairly large law firm, sort of a secondary market office of a large international big law firm doing M&A. And so it was kind of an absolute grind. So we were married in 2014. I then quit in I think at the end of 2016. So I didn't make it very long in big law. My wife graduated residency in 2017. I think we were pregnant when she graduated in late spring 2017. And then I formally kicked off the search January of the following year, Jan 1, 2018. So,
okay. And when was your first kid born?
Our oldest daughter was born in February of 2018. So when I say I kicked off my search Jan 1, 2018 and had our first newborn 49 days later. Yeah.
Right.
Super
So your wife
planning
was
here.
8 to 9 months pregnant when you launched the search.
Absolutely. So,
okay.
So that's
tell me about the conversation. Tell me what you two were talking about at the time.
So while all of these like timing things that you're poking me on are absolutely true, our planning was horrific. Mm-hmm. Maybe the one thing we got right was when I went and worked in big law, I felt like it was my chance to like push really hard and support her, right? Like supported her in her advanced education, so that when she realized that big law wasn't working for me, I was very burned out. I clearly didn't want and intend to stay for very long. And I was trying to figure out what the next step would be. She was as supportive. You know, she knew that soon she'd graduate, she'd go take on a nice, stable, steady job, and then could fund and that's kind of what happened, but, you know, be the supportive spouse for my adventure. So that worked out. The timing was great. When we realized we were going to get pregnant pretty quickly, the whole decision to take the entrepreneurial leap, like quickly, ASAP, there is no perfect time, took that to heart, which is great because I think it is true. No matter what, the earlier, the better.
Right. So you finding out that your wife was pregnant for you was sort of a, hey, like we got to like jump now then, as opposed to let's get our bearings for a couple of years and then try.
Exactly. So I think it was the summer of 17 when we decided to get pregnant and found out she had just graduated. I had to get my stuff in order. And that was the stretch of time where I think I probably had already discovered ETA. It was back when like Brent was, a sort of very vocal public figure for ETA, and Patrick O'Shaughnessy was doing a lot of those podcasts on ETA. And that was my indoctrination, you know, reading the usual books, the HBR guide, and kicked off 8 months later or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I guess the part that I'm curious to like chat about is the partner that makes the big risk jump career-wise. Like, their partner is generally not necessarily, they're probably not as risk on or risk tolerant, right? Like, I think when I talked to Anna, we weren't dating when I bought this business, but the like risk decision is pretty hard to fathom in hindsight for her. And so that's why I'm curious, like, I mean, dentists are not famously known for their risk tolerance, right? Like, how did she feel about it?
I have to be careful how hard I laugh because my wife might listen to this. No, but she would totally align. She is absolutely not a risk taker. She doesn't have an owner's mentality. She's a great periodontist, which is what I call it, an oral surgeon light. So she's got an intense career. And yet she's not, if in any way, she doesn't desire to be an owner of any business, of a dental practice, of you name it. That being the case, she came from a family of entrepreneurs. I came from a family of entrepreneurs. So the idea that this might happen, you sort of start something, was totally natural in her mind. What's very interesting is many of her classmates from dental school, the spouse who went to dental school is the one who became the entrepreneur because they took the entrepreneurial journey around that skill. So they would buy or open a dental practice.
Right.
And like unequivocally, she didn't want to do that and saw how much it would mean to me for me to do it. So it was very easy for us to make that decision.
Interesting. Did you talk about you setting up a clinic that she is the medical provider at?
Absolutely. And we have occasionally over the years, right? It occasionally becomes an interesting thing, or it's, a dinner table topic. At the end of the day, it comes down to kind of two things. Does my spouse, in this case, does she want to be the owner? Because everybody's going to look to her to be the owner no matter what I'm able to do.
Right.
And in many cases of her classmates, the husbands, the spouses would become kind of the back office support, the business mind of the business, the controller, you name it.
Right.
And I didn't have the capacity to do that. So it's never really been actionable for us.
That makes sense. Yeah. Anna and I talk about it a little bit, the idea of it, like she does childcare and babysitting and nannying. And so the idea of like, would she ever set up like either more like a staffing agency for nannies and like provide, kind of standardizing training for nannies to provide high quality care, or more of just like a daycare, like an actual facility. And would we do that together? So it's kind of, it's a fun like thought experiment, right?
Can I flip it around to you? Which is, and also like, I think I get the question around age a fair bit. So I'm 38. I think that means when 27, that was 8 years ago. So 30 is generally when we were making this plunge. What kind of walk me through how old were you, and walk me through, you're obviously out in Seattle now, and you're with Anna post having bought Bluma. So what was your personal situation prior?
Yeah. So I was living in New York when I, decided to leave private equity and go back to Seattle to buy a business. And so when I closed on the business, I was 28. So when I made the decision to leave finance, I was 27. And I'd been dating somebody else for several years. And we were in New York together. Her name, just to make this more confusing, her name was also Anna, which is unfortunate.
Well, for you, convenient, but slightly awkward.
Yeah, we did have this moment where me and my current girlfriend, we went to visit some of our my extended family in the South Bay, and we walk in, and then one of my like mom's cousins comes in, and I introduce Anna, and this mom's cousin just goes, "Oh, I thought you guys broke up." And it's like, no, different Anna.
Oh God. Not awkward.
It's funny because my current girlfriend, we were friends in high school. So for my high school friends, she was like the first Anna. Anyways, we don't need to go down this.
Oh, so you got Anna 1 and Anna 2. That's even better. Or how about this one, which is equally as awkward and terrible? When you go home as a searcher and your family asks you what you're doing professionally now.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I'm just cruising the Craigslist of businesses all day.
Exactly.
No, so anyways, I was 28, and my ex and I we moved back to Seattle. She worked as a software engineer, so she was remote friendly. And I basically just dove straight into buying a business. I think, like, to my discredit, I did not do a very good job of kind of including her in that. Like, we were both sort of full steam ahead career people at the moment when we were sort of making that move. Like, she worked for Palantir, and was like at a, which was still is like a really high growth, intense place to work.
Yeah.
And so she was all out at work. I was all out at work. And I think that life vision just kind of diverged then.
So call it mid-late 20s. The beauty of that phase is that you can go all in and be sort of singularly focused, for better and for worse. And so, like, when you choose to get married and have kids, there's so many other considerations. So I've made it pretty clear to you, I'm so jealous of the fact that you started so young, because you're going to have an entire ETA experience, likely from like beginning to end in a phase, before I even like listened to a podcast about SMB ownership.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. No, I'm glad I get to do it this way, right? Because it seems really hard to do it your way, right?
Yeah.
I think I would find it really like I'm still trying to unlearn a lot of habits from private equity in terms of how I approach work, the kind of priority work takes in my life. And maybe like if I had kids right now, it'd be a forcing function, right? Because like it would be more obvious, like, oh, I got to go prioritize my kids, not work. It's harder. I'm finding it harder to just say like, hey, like I need to prioritize my like physical health, or I need to go prioritize my like just mental health recharge or something over work. So that's where like I go back and forth. It's like maybe it'd be in a way easier because it forces prioritization. But that's what I was curious to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, and so while this is getting in the weeds, I actually think it's important. The thing that we've talked about for the last month is that the mentality of being an owner is very hard. The stress and the workload is potentially, significantly more than what people are used to. And so kind of how they relate that to their family and how they think about family as an outlet versus an additional, time suck and stressor, I think makes a big difference. So this is all kind of obvious, but when you're living it, it's tough to balance. You have to be hyper efficient. You have to say no to things that you really want to do. Like Taylor Wallace will text me once every other week and ask to go golfing, and I'm pretty sure he's going to quit asking because of how often I turn him down. Right. That kind of thing. Weekends are for the family no matter what. And if there's any time left over, it's to just kind of try and get ahead on work. And so maybe the one thing that's missing is the hard reset time, like especially for introverted folks like myself, like getting that very high quality, quiet, alone time to refresh, super hard to come by.
Yeah, no, so Anna and I are in long distance because she lives in Berkeley.
Yep.
But she'll be moving up here soon, knock on wood. But we've
Awesome.
Definitely found that part of being in long distance is force the communication pattern. Like you have to actually develop communication strategies out loud. You can't just fall into patterns.
Totally.
And so in a way, long distance sucks for a bunch of reasons, but there are certain elements of it that I think have made us better at managing the fact that I am a small business owner.
So maybe what it is it's just like stricter boundaries? Like
a little bit, yeah. And I think Anna is really good at sort of checking in with herself as to what she needs or wants, which I'm less good at. But as a result, I have kind of a model in front of me in terms of communicating needs. Yeah. But I think pretty early on in our relationship, she articulated hey, if you come to me with something about the business, I need to know if you're looking for me to give you ideas, if you're looking to vent, if you're looking what are we actually doing here?
That's such a good point. I almost want you to say that again. The fact that all of us are internalizing a bunch of stress. And so when we go home and we want to talk about it, what are we actually looking for the spouse to do? Because the spouse is probably it's not so clear to them, right?
Totally. And it's confusing because, you and I and a lot of business owners, we have a lot of peers, right? I have small business owner friends that I can reach out to. I can reach out to you, right? And talk about this stuff. And so that's where, figuring out hey, when am I looking for emotional support? When am I looking for hey, I need somebody to brainstorm with, and kind of allocating the energy accordingly. And actually just being intentional about it. I think that's been the adjustment I've needed to make.
We kind of refer to it as, are you looking for the soft love or the hard love? So anyway, so just to make sure everybody follows, you and Anna got together after you bought Bluma. So she doesn't even know you pre-Bluma. She doesn't know you as Wall Street Kaustubh.
Well, we were friends in high school. We've known each other for a long time.
Oh, so she does.
She does know me. Yeah, exactly. So we were friends in high school, and we've, been in touch the whole way. She likes to say that we stopped being friends for a few years, but it's just not true. But she's, pretty Berkeley lefty, and so my finance years were less interesting to her.
Got it. All right. So you're the one that
we've
was
been
crazy.
Friends. Yeah, exactly. We've been friends a long time.
Cool. All right. So when you went to buy Bluma, the conversation never existed that you were going to go do this. So you have reconnected at a point when that's all she knows is you are the business owner.
Correct.
I wonder if that's
exactly
easier.
right.
I wonder if that's easier.
Right. I mean, yeah, because she sort of, in theory, knew what she was walking into. But on the other hand, she like definitely did not know how involved this is, right? Like she knew it in theory, but in practice feels very different.
And your first 2 years were, I wouldn't call them different. I would just call them like typically rocky. So,
Totally.
Coming in and trying to have a spouse during that phase, like it's not easy. And, anyway, we don't need to.
No, we started dating. Yeah, because we started dating about like 14 or 15 months into business ownership. Which honestly, like for me, because one of the sellers did a 12-month transition, I had a lot of support for the first 12 months, and that seller really helped me a lot. It was really like starting year 2 that for me it was really sink or swim, and that's when we started dating. So she kind of saw the most intense period of the transition in many ways.
Yeah. All right. So let's assume that we didn't have our situations and we were sort of now going out to search. How would you have done it differently? Maybe for your situation and for mine, just because they were very different, right? You weren't married and you guys sort of reconnected after. Let's start there. How would you have done it in hindsight?
That's a good question.
Or separately, like what questions would it have been helpful for Anna to ask you, or what conversations do you wish you would have had with her to make this smoother?
Yeah, I think a big one would have been us discussing like what do we want my work life to look like, right? Like, do we prefer if I go to the office every day? Do we prefer if I work from home every day, right? Like those types, like a little bit more of like, how does this fit into our life together? Because that's one of the odd things about small business ownership is like it's pretty variable, right? Like the way in which you work from owner to owner. And so that I think that would have felt relevant, and honestly was not something I was thinking that hard about it when I was buying a business, right? Like I ended up buying a business that I have to be at the office at 6:45 a.m. every day, right? Like that has an impact on like lifestyle.
Coming from a guy who used to stay up till 2 a.m. working every night.
Like that's a hard body pivot.
I still do stay up till 2 a.m. sometimes just like for fun, right? I'm a night owl. And so I mean, things like that, right? I think
wait till you have a kid.
Yes. I think the other part is I feel good about the fact, like part of why I liked tree work more than say just landscaping is that it's a little bit more of a skilled trade where I can actually build up a team and a culture because I can pay people more. And that felt like a big pro of tree care. But I don't think when I was going through search, it would be disingenuous to say like I was only looking at deals like that, right? Like I was looking for just good businesses. And I think knowing what I know now and knowing Anna's particular kind of relational strengths and EQ, I think it would have been helpful to have her push me on like, hey, like, is this a team you want to be a part of? Is this a place you can imagine building culture? Because that's just for this to actually work, the learning, unless you're doing like a 2-year sprint flip type of a deal, which I wasn't trying to do, right? For this to work and be sustainable for several years, you need to really also like the people you're working with. You need to like the people, you need to like your lifestyle. So I think Anna would have done a really good job of pushing me on those fronts.
Yeah, kind of creating a sustainability to the ownership dynamic.
Right.
So I think ours was really different in that ours was much more a conversation about what is entrepreneurship going to mean for our life? Because my wife had committed to a career. So she, at the time, worked 4 days a week. Now she's down to 3, which is great. But It still means during the day, she's generally working. So it generally means we're going to have a nanny for our kids or extra help if we're both going to choose to be in careers. It generally also means that like the homekeeping tasks and responsibilities fall to both of us because we don't have like the sort of traditional gender roles.
Yep.
So what does that mean? We're both going to feel kind of taxed and overwhelmed. And how are we going to balance like the demands on time? Should have been something we talked more about, but we didn't know better, frankly.
Right.
Another one is probably like the stress and the hours that go into being an owner. So I think in her job, heavy cut, big boundaries between office and home. Like you can't do a whole lot in dentistry when you get home. In our line of work, for you and me, there's an awful lot we can do at home. And so creating the boundaries so that we can actually feel like we have family time and not always just be working 24/7, 365, because like it's very easy to do that. I think the way I think about it is if I'm paying attention to my phone and like who's calling, why it's ringing, the texts and the emails are stacking up. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting here at my desk or I'm at my kitchen table. I am being taxed mentally. And so a recent, like a 2025 change is when home, trying to turn the phone upside down. We put it in a red box, like on the kitchen counter, both of our phones.
Nice.
And it's our way to say, like, there's a boundary here.
No, I mean, Anna is really on, like, she would love for us to do that as well. And the adjustment I've been making is I changed my notification settings now on my phone over the last couple of months, where between 5 p.m. and 5 a.m., my email doesn't notify me. And the thinking being like, one, if somebody really needs to get a hold of me, they call or text. And then two, like it's not that I don't do work between 5 p.m. and 5 a.m., right? It's just that every time I want to work, I'm choosing to go into work mode, right? It just forces a level of intentionality. And I think was important. Like Anna and I have negotiated and worked together on the idea that, hey, like if you want to be working in the evening, that's okay, but like let me know so I don't come and try to start a conversation about my day and you're halfway in work and halfway listening. And so that I think like, because she understands that like my work, her, like your wife, her day ends when she's, done with the baby she's taking care of.
Exactly.
There's nothing she can do outside of that. But so she gets my work doesn't look like that. So for her, it's more, she just wants to know what mode I'm in.
Totally. And like, it's not the first thing you probably think about when you walk in the front door is like, hey, Anna, just so you know, this is the mode I'm in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's generally like you're coming in with a huge smile on your face, happy-go-lucky, or like you're steaming. And that's got to be tough for a spouse. So like, again, the whole point is not that we have answers. It's to have the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, look, the anecdote that that was kind of the peak of this was we had a customer complaint that had been dragging on for several months and, like a whole thing. And which is all fine. I'm used to customer complaints. We manage that as part of it. It's a home service business. It's going to happen.
Yeah, of course.
But this specific client had the habit of sending emails at like 10:15 p.m. And there'd be like, pretty angry emails. I mean, they were respectful and everything, but they were upset with us reasonably. And me just being me, like I have always checked my email before going to bed, which is just like in hindsight, like I'm not going to do anything about it right now. I'm not actually going to improve this problem. All I'm doing is like putting this like unpleasant information in my head and now I'm processing it right before bed. So it's like stuff like that I was like, okay, I need to like sharpen up my boundaries.
It's not so easy to do that though. That's the hard part. All right. So I've got another one, which is worth having a heavy conversation that's around finances and risk. So it's probably surprising we haven't talked about it yet, but when you buy a small business, you're generally going to be putting some of your savings into it in the form of equity. So you're going to be, limiting your own liquidity and safety net. I certainly think a discussion around how much is super appropriate, especially if you're going to go from one income to zero. That's I think a different dynamic than the one I had. And I credit my wife to funding my self-funded search. I think the second one is a personal guarantee. is a conversation I think that has to happen before you even start. Because if one or both spouses are not down for that, then I think it really frames the way you go down this path, if at all.
And how do you, like, if you were a spouse to a prospective searcher, what's the question you think they should be asking?
I think that you mean related to the financial risk.
Yeah.
I think the question is, one, what is the size business that's appropriate for our financial situation? And what's the amount of sort of mental stress we're willing to take? Because, there's, we could talk about this for an hour, but like how much cash you're willing and able to put in many ways dictates how big of a business you can buy, assuming you want to do it on your own. Assuming that's not the case, how much investor money you're willing to take on impacts the size of the business. So it impacts your criteria when you go out to search. In many ways, it should impact like your geography. And then I think the PG is just it's likely not a conversation around the amount of the PG. It's just, are you willing to stand behind and live with the fact that you could lose your home and all your savings if the business goes belly up? And are we comfortable with that? Are we eyes wide open around how that's going to cause us to lose sleep? And what are our personalities with respect to those things? Because they're not likely the same thing, right? Usually spouses think about them differently.
Yeah, you're sort of deciding like, hey, we're going to go introduce some conflict to our relationship. We're going to introduce a new form of stress to a relationship. Like, do we actually want to do that, right? And like,
so how would you have handled that?
Yeah, it's I think for me, I was thinking about the financial risk in the form of a smaller business is riskier because it's more fragile. And so, I took investor money to buy a bigger business than I could afford because I felt like a bigger business has better odds of succeeding, which I still do. But that meant that the PG I'm signing is in excess of my savings, right? Like there's no net worth left if I get hit on my PG. That to me feels like a risk that would be hard to stomach if I was the only income or if we had kids. You know what I mean? Like that's a certain gearing of risk that I think is very specific to the situation I was in. If I had kids already, I think just the outright financial dollars at stake would have probably pushed me towards a much smaller business, even though I think the smaller business is more likely to fail.
Good point. Two more things would be, it's hard to quantify the upside, right? I mean, I think it is worth talking about. We are doing ETA in order to have control over our lives, independence, whatever that means, because I think it's dubious sometimes. But I think you also have to acknowledge, like, part of this is to go generate financial independence. And there's going to be some short-term pain in order to have that long-term gain. I think a lot of people that I've seen go into this are actually taking less salary or less cash comp as searchers as business owners than they were in their prior careers.
Totally.
And that's not easy. It's something to talk about. So when you got into ETA, you were young or younger than I was. And so I'm going to just guess that I just worked a few more years than you, or a few more years older than you. I had saved up a little bit more, and not a lot. Like when we started, I was underwater. You were probably underwater as soon as you signed the deal docs. But I think the mentality is easier to get over that when you're sort of pre-marriage, pre-kids. It almost feels like an option on that first business you buy, because if it goes belly up, yeah, it's going to be painful. You're going to lose savings, file bankruptcy, but you're still young enough to start over again. You still don't have family that's leaning on you. Did you feel less stressed because of that, or am I thinking it about it too much?
Yeah. I think that would be right if I didn't take investor capital, right? If it were solely my money, then yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was taking bank capital, but that's a little bit different. But yeah, I think the addition of investor capital means like there's actually like relational risk. There's like moral risk, so to speak. That feels heavier to me, which goes into the buying a smaller business that maybe I could have bought entirely by myself. Like that could have lowered that piece of the stress, because you're right. Like if I bought a smaller business all by myself and blew it up in 3 years, like I would have been 31 and like would have gotten a job and like life would have been okay. So I don't think the like general concept is off. I think that the investors adds a layer.
That's a good point. Just a different counterparty or stakeholder to consider. So don't let me push you too hard here. But how do you think about, call it marriage and family planning and SMB ownership?
I mean, they're so related because of how all-encompassing small business ownership is, right? Like right now we're thinking about, okay, what should the long-term real estate be for our business? And that has an impact on my commute for like potentially the next 15 years, right? Who knows, right?
Yeah.
And like that has an impact on where Anna and I would like live in Seattle for like the next 15 years potentially. So in that way, and like most people don't have a choice over where their company, like where they work, right? They have a job and that's just where the office is. But like I'm actively choosing, are we going to renew this lease? Are we going to go to another place? And so to me, what that means is like, I don't feel any need to delay marriage or delay having kids as a business owner. I'm pretty excited about moving down into that phase of life. But I think you can't coast into it the same way I think I could if I were in a W-2, right? Like it's just the patterns on how your life are going to look are so much more up for design, which is part of what's cool about being a small business owner, right? Is you get to design your life, but you actually have to do it. Like if you don't actually design your life, like you just end up in some sort of a weird outcome that you might not actually like.
Totally. And like we're never taught to make these decisions proactively, right? Like the private equity job, they just had an office here. And if you wanted to take that job, well, you commuted to there. Now you weave it all together.
Exactly.
Same goes with schedule, right? Like same goes with the daily routine. When there's kids pick up and drop off, sporting events, all of it. It actually is easier, I think, to weave the SMB ownership and the family time needs together because of the independence you have as an owner. I don't think it's easier for a second, because then you just turn like a boundary into just pure chaos and juggling, right? Constantly talking to your team while you're in the car driving to and fro. And so it's just, again, we go back to being intentional about it and knowing what you're getting into.
Well, so the red box idea, right? Like putting the phones in the box. How did that happen? Who initiated it, or who brought it up?
Well, it came up because we found we were both, because her career and yours start very early, like your jobs start super early. I do the morning bridging of the gap, so she'll leave generally way before I do. And so she doesn't get the quality time in the morning. And then in the evening, it's just true. Like there's a witching hour and certain amount of chaos between like 4:30 and 7:30.
Mm-hmm.
And so on days we both work, it's actually kind of sad. We get 4 hours of time with our kids on those days. Mm-hmm. And we were kind of going by for weeks at a time where, in those hours, one of us would be on a phone call. It's a dental patient or, a seller in my case. And it just felt like we didn't have an ounce of presence. We were disjointed at home. And so we just decided, like, we already work a ton. We already have financial independence. Like, just put make a decision to put the phones down together for those 3 hours a day. And it's actually really helped. It's not like I've gotten less work done or dropped any balls. And yet I haven't gained any time back in my life, but it's better for our home life.
Yeah. The time itself is more enjoyable and more meaningful. But I think the part that's hard is like people can be in that trap for 20 years, right? And not realize it. And so that's where I'm curious to see how people actually make adjustments, right? Because it's unreasonable to expect everyone's just going to figure it out on the way in. And so I think the scenario you're painting where like, that's you guys started that way and then you realized something was off. That's the most common kind of path. But the part of realizing something is off, that's the hard part.
It's so hard. Yeah. And then just sticking with it. But it's all the same themes. What's tough, here we are, we're saying that the benefit of owning a small company is you have the independence of time, location, all of these things. Remember, that can be a bad thing because ownership can creep into every second of every minute of your life if you let it.
Yeah, no, that's right. Do you do any kind of, I can tell you what Anna and I do, but do you guys do any kind of periodic assessment of how home patterns are looking, work patterns are looking, stuff like that?
Yeah, we do. It's not not scheduled or planned, but we laugh. It kind of like arises quarterly. Usually like something is off, right? One of our kids is kind of telling us through their behavior or, the way we're interacting with each other that like, hey, something is off. And then it generally comes back to these themes over and over again. So
that makes sense. There's always that kind of, that's interesting.
Yeah. What about you? You guys would probably be way more proactive about it.
Yeah, I think long distance partially forces that too, but we've modeled now for about a year. We've been doing these like monthly check-ins on like the first Sunday of the month roughly. And what we'll do then throughout the month, like as things come up that we want to discuss, we can just put them on that agenda, right? So that way we can talk about it we know we'll get to it. We're not going to forget about it. But also if like we're too busy or like we're too activated right now to have a good discussion, like that's okay, right? We don't have to like dig into it right now. We wait for it to be in a cold state.
Batch your emails and then batch your like heavy topics with your spouse.
Exactly. Totally. And then the one thing that we'll do each time, which I really like, and again, this is all Anna's ideas, which I've enjoyed a lot, but she had to convince me a little bit. Now I like them a lot. But basically we'll each write down, like we'll be on Zoom because it's long distance, but we'll each write down by ourselves from the past month, one thing that was surprising, one thing that was confusing, one thing that was hard, and one thing that was easy. And then we'll just share those out. And then we'll usually like one or two of them will be worth like just talking about more.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. You guys, that's
worked well.
You're about to face, though, if she were to move up to Seattle, like a different dynamic, right? Which is totally you guys being together 24/7 or living together, maybe not together 24/7.
Yeah.
So you'll have your own speed bumps.
Totally. We're going to have to rebuild a lot of patterns for what they look like in person because both of us are also pretty independent individual people, right? And I've lived together with a partner before. She hasn't. And so I think like I'm pretty comfortable with the idea of being like, okay, like we can be ships at night today, right? Like ships passing in, like we don't have to do a whole thing today. And I think we've now sort of built trust. Like, okay, that doesn't mean like we're off. It just means like we need some time to like be by ourselves. But doing that in person is a whole nother thing.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you're 3 years in. Again, another reason I'm jealous because you're way better off now, introducing your in-person dynamic than, totally. 6 months in.
Yeah. I think, Anna moving up here last year would have been chaotic for her to witness me that up close while I'm kind of grinding in the business. Whereas I feel like now I can actually make choices and make like prioritization decisions that I want to make. So we can actually like have a kind of a proper negotiation as a couple.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm jealous. And so, that'll be with a spouse. And then kids is a whole nother dynamic. And probably, I'm not fair to ask you about it. But, you know, kids, we all get into, a lot of us get into ownership of small companies to truly have that time independence. And so I think it's true. And it's almost universally true with owners I talk to. They don't ever have to say no because of work. Like there's generally never time when you just can't go to a kid's drop off, you know, a performance, a celebration, you name it, a sporting event. So it's super valuable to have that flexibility. You just got to figure out the way it works for you.
Do you feel like you've been able to take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't pretty to start because I had an hour commute to one of the first companies we bought.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, like, you know, maybe I'll keep this one brief because it's a little painful. I don't really remember a little bit of my oldest daughter's life when she was super young. And I was just thinking about this. We have a 7, 5, and 2-year-old, and our 2-year-old is at a beautiful phase of how fun, and she, you know, every day feels like a growth spurt in every way, physically, emotionally, mentally, verbally. And it's kind of sad because I don't necessarily remember that so well with my oldest.
Mm-hmm.
More so with my son, especially because he was born right before COVID, so we were home a lot.
Right.
And so, yeah, like thankful to have had that third try to remember this phase. And I think it reminds me that even if you have the physical interactions with your kids in the early years of ETA or SMB ownership, sometimes you're so overwhelmed by the overwhelm of the business and the stress and the newness, and that it causes you to be less there than you wish you were.
Right. And like your partner, in theory, sort of made the decision with you. They're on board. They know what you're doing. The kids are just they just came along for the ride in a sense.
Yeah. And I guess I take a little solace in, like, one, they were really young. So
Right.
they're not going to look back and remember like the hour commute to work, the nights till 2 a.m, thankfully. So that's good. And also too, like I'm not done, right? I'm just on a new phase of ETA, I guess you could call it. And
Right.
I would say like the stress level's way down. The ability to draw boundaries, probably not completely solved.
Right.
The intensity not solved, but like some more stability to use as a boundary.
And so from here, right, if your kids, you know, when they are in college, say, and like they were to describe like what it was like to have their dad be in small business, right? Like what would you hope that they would be describing you as?
Yeah, so I was very intentional about one thing, and that is my parents were incredible. My dad had to be on the road a lot. And so a lot of the childhood I remember is he would be traveling a lot. When he was home, he was super there, but you know, he was on the road a fair bit. And so when I got into like even big law, I remember thinking, I'm going to get into careers where I don't have to be on the road a lot. And so I can be home and I can go to all the sporting events, whatever the events are. And so I think I have that. And so far I'm winning on that front. Like we said before, I'm certainly losing on the other fronts, like presence and boundaries.
Being present is like probably 70% of the battle, right?
I think there's a TV commercial about that, right? There's literally like a commercial about like being a good parent doesn't mean having to be extraordinary. You just have to be there. And,
okay, there you go.
That's kind of your point.
So like that's like the first 70% is can you actually be there?
Yes.
And then the other 30% you're working on is like, are you mentally there? Are you emotionally there? And all of the other things.
Yep. So everything's a trade. Everything's a trade.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of like, there's now, since I'm 31, a few of my peers who did search around the same time as me, they've just had their first kids. Like I can think of, 4 small business owners that I'm friends with who've had their first kid in the last like 6 months.
Wow.
And so I'm curious, like what you would share. And they're all sort of 1 to 3 years into business ownership. And so I'm curious what you would share with them in terms of, like how to approach that.
Well, there's the tactical stuff, and then there's like the, psychological, philosophical approaches. But I think tactically, it forces your time allocation and time efficiency to be just hyper focused. I think it's a ton of boundaries. Like, hey, when I'm on this thing, I'm going to be on doing that thing. So try not to double time it. Try not to juggle too much, so that then when you're off, you're off. I think I know who some of those friends are that you're referring to, and I've tried to suggest to them, you used to have whatever, 80, 90, 100 hours a week in your bucket. And now you've probably got 50. And so
Right.
you're going to have to say no to some things that really hurt. So don't expect all the no's to be easy to do. You're going to have to cut off the golf on Saturday mornings. You're just going to have to cut some stuff in order to be, to trade it for your kids, which is the right thing to do. And also to put enough time into work, because I don't think I would go into SMB ownership thinking you're going to be working a part-time job in the first 5 years of this.
Right. Yeah, I think, this is worth a topic, like a whole podcast topic, right? Is how do you, given that you have all these priorities and you have to make these trade-offs, how do you actually take care of yourself at some point, right? And how do you, if that's not in balance as well, you won't be able to sustain that level of kind of all out. But I totally agree, especially the first couple of years, right? When you've first bought the business and when you first have a child, it seems like there's going to be a period of you kind of just got to white knuckle it for a bit.
Totally. And there's no sense in speaking theoretical about doing this on little sleep. It's just one of those things everybody's figured out. I think a lot of what we're kind of wading into is mental health. It's tricky, right? And taking care of yourself while leading a business and being a good partner and trying to be a good father, there is just not a lot left.
Right. No, that's all right. I think that's a whole topic. We should attack it another date.
Yes.
Do you have anything else you want to say on this before I switch to the more tactical Q&A part?
No, look, we didn't come here to give answers to anybody. And
Correct.
I think it's all about making sure that you have a rough game plan on how you're going to handle this stuff. It's way easier that way than to, get punched in the face when you realize some of these things after the fact.
Right. Yeah. Just not being, eyes wide open, basically, right? Going in, you're going to get punched in the face, at least see it coming.
Totally. Yep. It's part of the journey.
Awesome. All right. So switching gears, as you know, we're going to do one little tactical piece at the end of each episode. So today I wanted to talk about how searchers should reach out to investors and kind of develop their investor base. And I was sort of thinking of what should that first email actually say or include? I was curious to hear if you had any favorites, or I can share as well.
This is a great one. So I'm going to step back a little bit. And I think what's hard is generally searchers are anxious about raising equity. So they want to get in front of investors ASAP. Investors, on the flip side, oftentimes don't really want to engage in deep conversation until there's an actionable deal, right? An LOI. So there's a chicken or the egg. So I actually am a fan and am a subscriber to a bunch of newsletters where, because there are more searches than I can talk to, a regular newsletter update about their search is a really great way for me to feel like I'm staying in touch with that searcher, know what they're looking for, whether or not they're on track. And so when they have something actionable and they bring it to me, it doesn't feel like I don't know them, even though I might not. And I think that's the way it should look to start for most people.
So because I really like the idea of having known the searcher before I see their first deal, right? I don't think I've invested in a single search deal where the first email was here's the NDA and teaser. And so then, but you're also right. I don't really have time to go build out searcher relationships at scale in any way. But I love the idea. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I love the idea of maybe the intro email is, hey, here's a Loom video of me introducing myself.
Love
It's
that.
3 minutes long. And if you are interested in basically being on my investor newsletter, like just let me know. And then you'll kind of get monthly to bi-monthly updates. And then, when there's an actual deal on the table, I'll show it to you.
And so this is probably the case for like cold relationships, trying to warm them up. I think you were probably trying to get more to the, I have work mentors, family. So the relationship exists. What should the outreach look like?
Yeah. And so for those, because I have a share of those on my cap table, I think the primary thing was when I was reaching out to folks being like, hey, like, this is the thing I'm doing with my life now. Like this, like, and a lot of folks, depending on, if they're actually sort of interested in the world, they generally find it pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
They're curious to hear about it. And so it's a great reason to be like, hey, like, we haven't chatted in a bit, like, with a former boss or former coworker. This is the thing I'm working on. Like, would love to catch up and hear your thoughts. And to the extent you might want to be an investor in something like this, I'm happy to keep you on the list. And I did a lot of that early on in terms of, and I just kept a, Excel sheet of who all I spoke to, who all expressed like, yeah, like, let me know, or they're kind of like, maybe not. And ballparked, how much I thought they would be interested in writing as a check. And if they had any sort of specific interests or, lack of interest. And it was really just like a build out a little bit of a database of your existing network to see like what interest there is already.
And hopefully, most of us are on that first deal using an SBA loan, probably aren't raising much more than $1 million at the absolute most. And so I would say a lot of searchers probably like over concern themselves with like how long their list needs to be.
Right.
That much more of the focus should be on communicating consistently and well and finding a great business.
Right. And I think like over the last 5 years, finding investors has gotten dramatically easier and finding good deals has gotten harder.
Oh, without a doubt. And maybe that's why both of us are probably thankful we're on this side then.
For sure.
Yeah, no doubt. So what about the opposite? Like what in that email or phone call says, you know what, I think I'm going to take a hard pass?
For me, the one turnoff is if I read a lot of kind of like bravado in the email, like, and obviously you're reading an email, like you can't really understand tone, but I don't know a lot of searchers who have been successful who are not also quite humble and quite sort of just, they kind of know they don't know everything. And so they just have this natural curiosity to go find the right answers. Right. And folks who don't have that natural curiosity, like being a business owner, the like core part of your job is just go figure out how to solve little problems in ways you hadn't thought about.
Yeah.
And like you've never actually solved before, right? Like, and over time you've solved so many problems that they start to look the same or they start to repeat and now you're a better business owner.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of it is solving problems that you didn't really know how to solve before. And just, you just are curious. You call the like local state government office and ask them for how to fill out the form. It's like stuff like that. And so I think to me, that's the one clear red flag I see when it feels like the searcher really thinks they know everything.
Got it.
What about you?
Well, I see it a lot, and I think it reflects a mentality. It's not a deal breaker, but a lot of times I'll just see a lot of phrasing around the searcher saying they're giving up equity, they're losing equity, and I just think it's a mental shift is needed there. So not a deal breaker, but like to be clear, this is a partnership, and the business is selling equity in exchange for dollars, and so just to be more thoughtful around. There's two sides to that coin. I totally agree with the bravado piece because folks are going to get punched in the mouth no matter what. You got to be ready for it and be humble. The flip side of that is sometimes getting on calls with searchers, you sort of don't feel that they have conviction, that they're almost looking for permission to do the deal or like the thumbs up. Right. Yes, this is a good deal. Go do it. And I think they need to come to the conversation with that conviction, that excitement. And maybe the tactical piece is like, know the answers to a lot of the questions you're going to be asked, the basic stuff. Nothing worse than like I get on a call, ask a half a dozen questions, and like the response is generally, "Oh, it's a good. I'll follow up." Like I'm not sure, and that's just having had read like a 2-page summary. So
no, that's like the preparation going into those calls, and sort of being, it is still a pitch, right? Like, obviously you have to like be truthful and accurate, but there is an element of like, hey, how do you know your stuff? Do you really know this business so far? Like, it's a hard balance to strike. Like the balance of both not coming off too cocky, but also not coming off educated and like you understand the risk you're taking.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's a good thing for searchers. Like no one personality is who gets funded. Anybody can get funded. Yeah, you just have to take advantage, match your strengths with your approach.